Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about one of the reasons why React and its entire purpose and premise and everything is failing to reach the potential that at least I had envisioned, that it was trying to solve when it was, being released and touted as the next best thing. So React is all about web components, and web components, the reason why you want to use them is because they should be completely modular, so you can take one component and plug it into another app. Very similar to architectures that go back to, I'm a big fan of Django. Django, you build apps, and you could have projects that have that consist of different apps, and you should try to define those apps so that they're plug and play. That an app that works in one project should just be able to work in another project if you build it in enough in an encapsulated, isolated way. Now, it's very easy to integrate or to design it in a way that becomes reliant upon the actual project, so that when you try to plug it in another project, it doesn't work because there are now dependencies that, it might be dependencies on an API that are specific to one project and not another. It could be your third-party tools that maybe it's using that another project's not using. There's all kinds of different things that could end up creating that type of a problem. And it's very difficult to truly build encapsulated modular projects that can just literally plug and play. One of my favorite projects that goes back to photo viewers and light boxes that I've used on a lot of websites years ago is Magnific Pop-Up. So this is a jQuery plugin, and you can see that it's really pretty and everything. So this jQuery plugin is essentially drag and drop. Now it has its own JavaScript file that you need. It has dependencies on the jQuery library. And then you have to run some execution code. So you have to run a script and fire up whatever sort of modal. And then there's some objects that you can set to change its functionality. And it just works. But the problem people had was that they're like, well, damn it, now I have to download this JavaScript file, and I have to make sure I have jQuery in there, and then I have to run execution code. Wouldn't it be better if I just had a module that I could just drop right into the application? So React's entire mindset, it seemed to me, was that you can build modular components that are just literally going to be able to drop into your application. But where things never seem to work out that way is that you have plenty of projects out there that people are doing where they're building some React specific functionality, whether it's like validation or paging or something like that. And they build it in a very generic way so that other people can then introduce that into their code, and then they can override certain features and things like that. But from what I've seen in the wild, though, it seems like so many implementations of React are building it in a way, just like with the Django apps and things like that, where literally these components cannot just be dragged into another project. These components have a very, very complicated parental hierarchy of all kinds of props and on-change functions and on-blur functions, and all kinds of different functions that are passed down through a parent-child relationship. Ancestors going all the way up to grandparents and even further beyond that. So I've seen a lot of these components that are built that way. So you literally can't take the component and then just drag it into a side project to run it and kind of see how it operates, because instead you end up having this very, very complicated hierarchy where you have a component that relies upon essentially half of your JavaScript project, and then on top of that relies upon a very sophisticated API that the API needs to be up and running, or you need to have a mock API. So you basically have a situation where these plugins or these components don't work. And the entire premise behind React was that we were going to have truly modular component-based systems, and we don't. So the Shadow DOM is something that was talked about a lot, where one of the problems with jQuery is some of those plugins required CSS files and they required other JavaScript files. And this whole Shadow DOM thing is that you can embed your CSS and everything within the component itself. Now, React, you can do the same thing, but once again, in most real-world applications, you end up building something so complex and so unique to your own project that the code reuse from these components is not nearly as much as you would like. So that's one of the problems I see, because in a perfect world, all of these components that we're using are being built in the wild by all these different companies, like what we saw with the jQuery plugins, where you had a lot of very talented people building plugins, and some of the plugins were shit though. I mean, there was definitely some headaches with some of the plugins out there, but the React world, it's I would say it's it has the potential to do the same thing, but I haven't necessarily I have not seen it so far. What I've seen mostly is that some people are using certain components that are written out there for React, and they're having to either customize a ton of its behavior, or they're then maybe extending it to the point where it doesn't resemble what you have, and you certainly, like, in a lot of cases, as far as I can tell, I haven't seen the jQuery type plugins like those photo viewers in React that just work very easily. So that is one of the problems. And so then, with React, and why everybody jumped on it was because they were like, well, React's been doing it since 2011 with Facebook, so clearly they have this right. And for the most part, they have, one of the only real implementations of a web component-based world that everybody kind of envisions the web heading towards, including Google, who during its, I think it was a Google talk back in like 2014, 2015, it might be 2015 at this point. They were talking about Polymer, and Google Polymer is not a project that has really taken off, but it's a project that was using the Shadow DOM, and it was all about these components that all of its dependencies are just all contained within the component itself. But once again, you suffer from the same thing, where it's hard to build a component in a way that is just going to work for everybody's needs. And most real world situations, like when you have a bunch of components, like you talk about presentational versus stateful components within React. So what that means is that the state is the one that maintains the calls to the APIs and things like that, and then the functional components that don't need to have like the specific functions that React comes with, like on component, did mount, and things like that. That you don't need to have. If you don't need all that boilerplate or that excess code, then you can just have functional components instead, which are really just functions that return JSX code. So a lot of people are building reusable components in that sense. So projects will have all kinds of different functional components, but the problem with those functional components is that they don't necessarily just work with just any old particular project. Like most code that you're writing for any sort of whatever sort of thing that you're working on is most likely going to have enough differences that it's just not going to be able to have some sort of drag and drop perfect world type scenario that I think Facebook and Google and all these other companies have been trying to solve. And instead, we have a very complicated component hierarchy where components are reliant upon more dependencies than they were even back in the days of jQuery and its plugins and things like that. So I don't necessarily think that we've solved any major problem yet. The problem that we were initially set out to solve when we were coming up with these libraries to do some of the things that they're touted for being able to do. Angular also comes to mind as far as projects and why these projects can spin out of control with complexity. Some of them, for some very smart developers, you go back a couple of years, they would always there was a lot of argument and a lot of discussion going on with Angular 1, which was very highly adopted, where it said, the Angular is great when things are very to-do list type apps, but as soon as you start really getting into some complex functionality, which is pretty much every major enterprise application out there, Angular starts to fall apart. Like there's so many Angular specific keywords and terminology and just ways of doing things the Angular way that you end up fighting the framework. You realize you get some sort of some weird event bubbling or errors that occur like way down within the stack, the Angular stack, and the same thing happens with all these other libraries as well. But that was a major concern even back then, where it was like, well, as soon as things get really complex, Angular 1 starts to fall apart. Now, some people probably will disagree, but the fact of the matter is we want to have tools that allow us to work very easily. We don't need to have PhDs having to write all of our systems because they're the only ones who understand AngularJS or anything like that. So I would argue from a business perspective that we need tools that are easier to work with, and in some cases we're not getting those. We're getting things that are much, much more difficult to tie together. One of the problems as well with these modular components, especially with very complex, like I said, parent-child relationships going all the way up to their grandchildren or even beyond that, or grandparents and beyond that, is that you have a lot of functionality that exists, and that really depends on a working API. So one of the most important things with any sort of modern day JavaScript development that a lot of people fail to really implement well is creating a mock API. Like your entire data model should be mocked from day one, and every piece of functionality you add should have a corresponding mock API that's easy to work with, because the last thing you need is to have an entire, a very complex a very complex hierarchy of dependencies upon an API that's working in order for everything to work. Because obviously with JavaScript, if you get a certain piece of data that's not coming down correctly, or you have functions that are strings, or you get some sort of some problems like that. Of course, we have React prop types to prevent some of that stuff, but you can even override those. But you can have some major issues and some dependencies on APIs and things to be working in order for the application to work. And once again, as far as I can tell, as soon as tools get really, really complex, there is no real ability to be able to just take a component and then plug it into a separate project and then have it work the exact same way. I've seen components that rely upon this component and that rely upon this helper and this and this and this and this and this, and it's all being imported all over the place using the new JavaScript ES6 and built together by Webpacks, to the point where it's like, damn, I need to bring down half the project plus half the internet via NPM to make sure that this damn thing works. So that is, to me, some of the problems with taking tools like Babel and then splitting them up into all these different Babel promises and Babel ES7 features and ES6 features to try to limit the overall Babel file size. You're now creating all these dependencies that if you have code, especially within some of these functional components or these stateful components that then rely upon some of those imports from third-party NPM modules that also then rely upon a million other things, you're creating a system that is just a complete clusterfuck. I mean, that's the best way to describe it, because we need to be independent of all this stuff. And to me, I'd rather download more than I need than to have to download a ton of different dependencies. But that's kind of the direction that everybody's going in these days, where we're getting the bare minimum. Like you look at React and they spun off the React DOM and all that stuff, and I can understand why they're doing that, but I don't know that I don't know that it makes things any easier for web developers. I really don't. So that is just one piece of, I think, the complexity of modern day web applications that isn't really talked about. When I say web development is hard, it has nothing to do with the individual individual code files or how an arrow function works, or how the spread operator works. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, because if somebody thinks that that's the only thing and that is the complexity within web development, they clearly don't have enough experience in the real world to know what it is that I'm talking about when you're talking about massive applications with massive dependencies, and then having to run it via all these different dev tools that become absolutely imperative to have running for you, because otherwise you're basically flying blind. And so clearly, if somebody thinks that I'm just simply talking about some of the fundamentals of the programming language or library, then they're completely misinterpreting what I'm talking about. But either way, I would say I'm not even being negative or down or anything. I'm just simply saying that there is work yet to be done. I mean, there is work to be done on making things a little bit easier to do. I know of a manager that used to be a manager back in the days of Perl, and he would tell me the story about how in Perl, you could write things in so many different. You could write things in crazy ass ways, just like JavaScript, where you could literally minify and put everything on one line so that nobody knows what the hell is going on. And some people did that for job security because it made them look smarter than other people, and in many cases, like it becomes a write-only language where you write it and nobody knows what the hell is going on with the code, including the person that wrote it. Given enough time, and he would fire people for doing that. Actually, if they did that, more than a couple of basically, I think gave him like one chance. He was saying, and then he would fire people for doing that kind of stuff, because when you're working on a team, you want things to be as clear and as clear as possible. And I've always been a proponent for verbosity over magic, over minified craziness. I would like every developer to have the opportunity to understand what it is that's going on with their code as quickly as possible. So in some ways you could be like, well, it's this minified thing and blah blah blah. They should be able to figure it out. Well, in a perfect world, they probably should, maybe, but if it's costing the company money because somebody didn't want to just spell something out a little bit better, then I think that that's a problem. But all right, guys, that's really it. This video is dragging on a bit, so I'm gonna let you guys go. You guys take care and have a good day. Bye. Hey guys, so a lot of you ask me, how do I get my foot in the door to become a programmer? And I just want to take a moment to mention Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp is a 12-week intensive course that focuses on the technologies of the here and now for web development. Some of the things that they're actually teaching in this 12-week course, it's geared to get you into the industry by focusing on things like jQuery, Node.js, React, Angular, how to use GitHub. So a lot of the things that you're going to need to do as a developer, as soon as you start, they're going to be teaching you in this coding bootcamp. And the entire goal is to be able to get you into the industry within 12 weeks. So if you guys are interested in learning more information about Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp, just check out the link in the description tab of this video. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.